Thank you, Sophie, for this amazing introduction. I definitely have to say that the moderation today is top-notch. Super excited about that. So hi to everyone that haven't met me earlier. Sophie has already introduced me. I'm Karina, CEO at Female Founders. And I have to say, I'm really excited about the upcoming topic. We are talking about underfunded and overhyped. Why do certain health tech sectors face neglect? And there's definitely a very great panel discussing this topic, and I would like to welcome them on stage. So first, there's Cihat Cengiz. He is an investor at Dieter von Holzbrink Ventures. So give it up to Cihat. Second, we have a woman that wears many hats. So this is Kerstin Bock, and she is not only co-founder and CEO of Openness, but she's also part of the Atomico Angel program, and she is also an expert advisor at the European Commission. So please give it up for Kerstin. And last but not least, we're missing a little bit the founder perspective here. So I'm excited to welcome Jonas Ils. He is the co-founder of River AI, an early stage company tackling bias in radiology AI. Give it up for Jonas. All right. I obviously introduced what you are doing and in your everyday life, but we want to know more from you. So I would like to also give the stage to you, introduce yourself without mentioning something that I've mentioned already from you, and let also the audience know what excites you about health tech. And I would say, let's start with the lady in the room. So Kerstin.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thanks for having me, first of all. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, wearing several hats. Maybe just to, I guess, give a little bit of background. My background is actually marketing and communications. So Openness as a boutique agency, we're focusing on scale-up companies. But then I think the perspective that we are talking about today is probably much more my past 4.5 years with the European Commission, working with the EIC, so the European Innovation Council, the biggest deep tech initiative actually in Europe right now, with a 7 billion fund. And and I think this also excites me probably the most about health tech overall. I've looked actually mostly at diagnostics and then also reproductive health. And this is actually also what I'm investing in personally as a business angel, both with the Atomico Angel program, but also on my own. And really, to be honest, I'm also looking from the patient perspective there. So I have endometriosis myself. I'm going through fertility treatment. So there's just a lot of things going wrong out there, to be honest, that I think need to be fixed. And this is really from the perspective that I'm looking into it. Yeah.
Thanks so much, and thanks for also being open. I think it's not always easy to certainly open up and talk about that you're also someone going through these struggles. So very interesting perspectives that you're sharing here. Jonas, what about you?
So yeah, I'm as you said, the co-founder of River AI. We tackle bias in medical AI. Bias is a problem because we always have a lack of diverse data. That's always the foundation of bias. And we solve this by helping companies that create diagnostic algorithms to actually generate data with generative AI models. So we're generating artificial radiology images. You can imagine it like, we always say it's kind of like an art forger. You show him or her thousands of Picasso pictures and tell him he understands or she understands how these images look like, and you can say, hey, paint me 100 new images. And these images can then be used to train AI models to help physicians in diagnostics, and by that reduce bias, because bias is the key issue in AI, or one of the key issues in AI. We've seen it with racist chatbots years ago, and it becomes more and more pressing as we move towards making cancer diagnostics, for instance. And yeah, what excites me about healthcare is I don't have like the specific background in healthcare, but I always feel, it sounds a bit cheesy maybe, but I always feel like this huge responsibility to work on hard problems that help us move forward as people, as society, as human beings and individuals. Because if we don't work on these problems, what's the meaning anyways? And that's what excites me about healthcare, because I feel personally there's healthcare where you can do it, and then there's climate at the moment where you can do it, and for me it's healthcare.
Nice. Thanks so much for sharing. And we definitely will go a little bit into the data bias later on in the discussion. Cihat, tell us something about you.
Yeah, I think you introduced me as an investor, which technically, yes, that's my title, and that's what I do kind of every day. I actually don't use that title too often because I kind of have two hats. I'm the investor in one sense, but I'm technically coming from a total different perspective to venture capital. So I was an engineer before and did lots of different stuff in the pure algorithmic area, spent a lot of time in the academic domain. So hence, when people meet me the first time, I'm actually more an engineer. I speak the language of them, and then obviously after a certain point you need to put the investor hat on, and then suddenly a total different personality comes out. But technically, kind of this is something I'm passionate about, to kind of not start as an investor, just more start as an engineer, as a founder itself. I was before a founder as well, so I can kind of speak the language. And the excitement, I mean, yeah, if I call myself an investor and healthcare investor, because that's the area where I focus most at this stage, I actually call myself an impact investor because I think the impact in healthcare is something which excites me a lot, not really, what comes after. It's like if I have an impact on the population I'm serving, that's already kind of a benefit to kind of continue what I'm doing.
Nice. Thanks for mentioning that. And maybe also, since you said impact, and Jonas, you also tackled that, I think what's always interesting is, since this is a conference about diversity and also gender diversity, what we see is that specifically a lot of female founders also start their journey and start their companies in areas where they can have a lot of impact, and healthcare is one of them. That's why, for instance, in Healthtech, we do actually see way more female founders, which is certainly just an exciting factor here on this side. I remember 1.5 years ago, we've been not here, but also in Vienna at a different venue, but we had Lead Today, Shape Tomorrow, and we had a panel where we talked about how health tech is one of the thriving industries in Europe, one of the industries that's growing the most when it comes to venture capital money being allocated to it. Now, the last 1.5 years have been difficult. We talked about this already this morning, that VC funding definitely has slowed down. I would love to understand a little bit, how much is the healthcare sector affected by it? And maybe just for everyone in the room, healthcare is obviously a very broad topic. When we talk about health tech today, we intentionally do not focus as any sort of biotech solutions on pharma or medicine, but really focus more on the other aspects of health tech. So Cihat, how is the health tech sector at the moment? How much is it affected also by the slowdown in funding?
Well, I think, yeah, we've seen a bit of a balance towards less funding and smaller rounds definitely, and lower valuations. Is that healthy in healthcare? 100%, because I mean, when I was in 2021, we've seen stuff in terms of high valuations and rounds and founders coming like big chest out and saying like, this is us and this is healthcare and this is what you need to pay. It was definitely going the wrong direction. Did we play that game as VCs? Most probably some did and some didn't, but most of the people did. So there was a slowdown, definitely. But I personally think that, when we talked about this yesterday, Kerstin, I think there's some areas in healthcare where there's lots of hype and there's a lot of healthcare which you don't see because they have such a long development cycles and certification cycles and all of the other cycles you need to go through. You don't see them. So there's actually a lot of stuff happening in the background you don't see, and hence there's just the feeling of like, oh, it's actually slowing down. I can reassure you there's a lot of stuff going on in the background you don't know about, and hopefully they're going to make it so we can serve the people. So there's definitely a slowdown, but I'm optimistic in that sense. I think that we won't see the same dip as in other industries. Especially, we talked about B2C before, the guys on the panel. B2C was always difficult. B2C plus healthcare, also similarly difficult. But I'm optimistic, and we'll see, an uptick again. and you can see again the valuations coming up and the founders coming chest out and saying, that's it, and play the game. So yeah, it's kind of a black and white story. I think we didn't have anything healthcare, which was just pacing. It was just either up or super up, down, not really a balance in the middle.
Yeah, and we definitely also come back to the B2C component later in the panel. Kerstin, you're obviously investing at an earlier stage, so what's your perspective on the current health tech market?
Yeah, so Jihad actually stole my talking points, but I think, no, I'm kidding. No, but I think to second that, and I also actually do mostly invest in quite research-heavy companies, so that have a very long go-to market, and also both, again, angel investing, but also at the EIC actually. And I'm quite optimistic about that, because I think what we've seen the past months really is that, capital has to be a bit more patient. Actually, I think a lot of investors have also started to invest into categories that haven't been too interesting to them before, because like faster returns, just something that they had to show. And I think right now more and more are going into those impact categories also in healthcare. But then I think, of course, there's the flip side, and I think we also do see a lot of in AI and data, obviously health data, and I think democratizing data, we can talk about that at the end, I think is also a very big topic right now. I think this is something that just needs to change. And then obviously there are a lot of other, I think, hype and trend topics that, again, are probably also really important when we talk wearables, mental health, digestive health, and all of these topics. But I think also, again, what Jihad mentioned, I think there's just so much going on in the back of the room, in diagnostic, et cetera, that we will probably only talk about in 5 years, which is actually happening now.
And you already mentioned a little bit of the trends that we're seeing. Any other particular trend in healthcare that you want to point out at this point?
I think most probably, if you look in left and right, all the people around you, I mean, wearables is a big thing, and everyone kind of wears some sense of wearables, and I
See there.
I have one, yeah.
Over there.
Over there as well, yeah. I mean, look around left and right. You will see people, and it struck me. I mean, I was living in London, in Cambridge, in London, the last 6 years, and I started saying like, oh, it's not a big thing. And then I was driving a train, and I basically just started observing people coming out in and out of train, and I was kind of positively surprised that I can see wearables in like a lot of people. That was UK, maybe Germany's a bit different. Austria might be a bit different, but it's definitely a trend, and these things are getting better and better. I mean, if I could tell you what's happening in the area of like wearables and what they can do, and what they will be do very soon in like maybe like 2 to 5 years, it's quite amazing what people are working on, and I think they will be hitting the market. So, and that comes with obviously precision medicine. We kind of discovered that everyone is different, which is not surprising to people, but we kind of treated healthcare as like almost a binary. You're healthy or you're not healthy, and if you're not healthy, then you're not healthy, and we don't go deeper in the whole story, but you're just not healthy, so take it and leave it, basically. And that's a big topic, precision medicine, and I think from the tech side, you can mirror it maybe like it's, I mean, I'm super hyped about genomics, everything. I think that's what I say internally, we reached a point where we can't really treat symptoms anymore, and we need to try to kind of, and you can do it with genomics, just kind of erase some of these diseases which are kind of genetic based and have genetic disorders. That I'm hyped about that. And there's lots of more tech stuff we can talk about, but I think precision medicine combined with wearables, and on the tech side, for me, genomics it excites me the most. I think we can do a lot of cool stuff with it, and there's already some treatments where we kind of starting to kind of erase diseases, most of them rare diseases, which are quite nasty, especially in the baby age of people.
Yeah, I can only second that. And I think in addition to that, I mean, obviously we also see topics that are quite regulatory heavy. I mean, if you look into, let's say, pain management, for example, and I think, cannabis legalization in Germany, for example, but also across Europe, I think there's just a lot of topics, coming up when it becomes regulatory, like more easy. So I think those are also topics kind of defining the current discussion. But I think everything that Jihad mentioned in terms of genomics, maybe also cancer diagnostics and all of that, like quite early on, right? So these are all the like major topics that should be tackled and are being tackled as we speak. And I think this is like just really great to see. And also we actually talked about that yesterday in terms of storytelling and how to actually talk about these companies that actually can't talk about things. But I think, if COVID has, shown us one thing, right? I think if we think about BioNTech, the CureVax, etc., I mean, I think everyone knows now how long they've been working on their technology. And I think if we, think about these kind of flip side of companies, I think there's so much more we can talk about.
Definitely. I think what's so unique about health tech is that we talk about a subject that is concerning our most invaluable asset, our health, right? So what we want is that the healthcare solutions that are out there on the market are really rooted in science, rooted in data-driven insights, but there comes a huge problem with that. And the problem is that the data itself, there's disparities and there's bias. And this is exactly a topic that you, Jonas, are tackling. So maybe you can share a little bit more about how you're tackling that and share a little bit more about the whole problem on data bias in healthcare.
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first problem that we have, I think there are two problems. A, you have an accessibility problem, and then you have an availability problem. So the accessibility problem, there is data, we could use it, but we can't access it. Various reasons. A, privacy. I mean, we're talking about patient data, health data, it's very sensitive, and we don't want our data to be used by just anyone to build tech and commercialize. And then you have like also an underlying kind of like infrastructure problem, because if you look at hospitals and hospital IT and how the data is stored, it's horrible. You have a lot of PDFs, you have still a lot of handwritten texts with diagnosis of doctors. So it's extremely difficult from an accessibility perspective to get enough and high quality data. The second point is the availability problem, where we have certain issues that, for instance, if you look at one symptom of that, if you look at early stage breast cancer detection AI, they got it a bit under control, but a few years ago, these algorithms worked substantially worse for women of color than for white European or white Caucasian females. Why? Because most mammogram screenings, so you need mammograms to train the AI to detect cancer in a mammogram, most mammogram screenings were from white European females or white Caucasian females. And the tissue structure is just different, so the AI gets confused, and that's a huge problem. And we have this availability problem also along various other bias dimensions. It gets extremely complex, it gets super subtle, it gets into like the technical configurations of a scanner, so the problem is vast. But these are kind of like the two aspects we see, like from a high level, accessibility and availability. Now, what we try to do to solve this, again, I feel are two or three aspects that you need to solve. First is the privacy issue. So because we first need to solve the accessibility problem. First, access the data that's actually there and make it usable in a way that it helps us develop tech. So this is key, is solving privacy. We're doing this. There are various ways to do it. We believe the most holistic way to do it that also helps you tackle the other availability problems later on is doing it with synthetic data, what I just explained as an art forger. So what we do is we take also trained generative AI models, we plug them into hospitals, we take them where the data is, we train it there with partners like clinics, they might have radiology images, let's say CTs or mammograms. They understand how these images look like. We only take this statistical model of the data that understood how images look like, and then we license access to it, and we give companies the opportunity to generate the data they need themselves. And they have fake data, which is fictional patients, so it's not directly connected to any real-world patient anymore, which makes it inherently private. There are a few mechanisms you have to implement to make sure that it's actually private, but that's the thesis, and it works. And if we solve the privacy problem, if we are able to get like a good foundation, a diverse foundation across ethnicities, demographics, technical configurations of scanners, we will be able to multiply certain underrepresented cohorts in the data. And by that, as a next step, also solve not only the accessibility issue, but also the availability issue. And that's how we think about bias, and that's how we try to tackle it with synthetic data.
Awesome, thanks. I feel like we're already with this, you already kind of went in the direction of what could be potential solutions of certain health tech sectors being underfunded. Well, we definitely come back to that. One of the areas where the data issue is very much present is actually an area which currently receives a lot of media attention, is very much discussed in the whole VC world, and that is actually women's health. So no matter if we talk about fertility, which is certainly not just a female topic, but in the media it's often presented as one, but also endometriosis, menopause, or other areas, it seems like the femtech market has such a strong potential. However, if we really look into it, there's so little funding yet going into this industry. What are potential reasons for that? Maybe, Kerstin, you want to share your perspective here.
Yeah, totally. And also, thanks for mentioning that fertility is not only a female issue. Actually, also, we talked about that yesterday. You know, I think we also need to differentiate between femtech, so tech around the female body, and then, of course, we have reproductive health tech, for example, which, again, goes both ways. I think that's number one. But looking at the female body, I think, you know, it starts basically with research, and Jonas also mentioned that right now, right? So women are just way underrepresented in clinical trials, in clinical studies, not only women, but more specifically also women of color. So I think this is like another part, again, under research. I think if we just looked into the US, I think cardio diseases are actually the number one death reason of women, and yet I think only 20% of patients in clinical trials are female. So I think that's like just crazy. So I think this is like definitely where we're coming from. So it's just under research and underfunded already in the research stage. So I think that's number one. And then, of course, going further, I think this is also, again, we don't have the data, we don't have the basis. Like any founder basically that runs a company in this has to pull up the data. They have to kind of have this like long press to actually, you know, survive. So, and you mentioned it before, I think if we look at endometriosis, I mentioned it before, I think on average a woman takes like 10 years to get a diagnosis. I think for me it took probably 18 years, which is crazy, and I needed a surgery to actually diagnose it. And then on the flip side, there are companies, I'm actually also invested in one right now, working on solutions to bring that diagnosis down to ideally 6 to 8 months, working on actually testing biomarkers, for example. So I think just looking at it, we just have to, you know, overcome basically all these years that we haven't looked at it. And I think, you know, this just takes quite a lot of time, and this is probably, at least from my perspective, one of the reasons why it's also still heavily underfunded.
Thanks so much. Do you think that currently, as there is a lot more media attention, for instance, on the topic of endometriosis or also other women's health topics, do you think this really also helps to shine more light on it and also to speed up maybe the research in that area and also the attention and funding in that area?
Well, it certainly helps, but I think it's just not enough. I mean, if we stay with endometriosis, and obviously there's so many other topics, but I think there's also quite some public funding. I mean, France, I think 2 years ago, announced the first public fund for research, but I mean, I think there was like, I'm gonna lie now, but I think maybe like 5 to 10 million. So I mean, where does this bring you, right? So I think if we talk about it, yes, I think that's definitely going to be helpful. But if we talk about it, we also have to do something about it, and we have to be, you know, real about it. So I think if we look at, and Jihad, you will know that, and I think you can probably add to that. But if you look at the costs, what it needs to, you know, certify a product, to really go through regulations, to really basically run clinical trials. I mean, this is not. No company is getting anywhere with that, and I mean, it's not even that they get all of this, right? So I think it definitely helps, but you know, I think honestly, as in all categories, when we talk about feminism, I mean, we just haven't looked at it for way too long, so now we just have to like really do much more about it.
Thanks. Geert, I know that reproductive health, for instance, is something that you are super interested in. So what are also potential reasons that this certain area is also an area that has been overlooked for way too long?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something I think last year when I was in Vienna at the same conference, I was quite vocal about this because back then people started speaking about femtech and fertility as one thing. And I said, like, by genetics, fertility is 50% male and 50% female. Hence, there was a huge pressure on saying, like, well, the woman is the problem and let's try to fix her in the whole story, which is kind of. And then I started talking to like experts in the area and saying, like, well, this is what I'm thinking. It's 50% female, 50% male. And then I like the quintessence of all the experts, unfortunately, coming to me and saying, like, well, it doesn't matter how bad the condition of the male part of the situation is, we can get something out of that, which was like the whole thing. And then even the experts put so much pressure on the women to kind of put her on an optimized path to actually get pregnant, which is kind of a very tough part to go through. And I started actually searching for it, like there must be someone working on the other side of this. And it took me 2 years, and an ex-founder lady, she started a company, fertility area, focusing on both, and she introduced me to a researcher from Barcelona, and she was spot on working on the other side of the story. And I got super excited about this. And I'm going to introduce you to Kerstin as well, saying, like, well, you should meet her definitely because she's working on that. So I think it slowly starts getting balanced a bit more, but there's definitely a lot more room to speak about the whole story of fertility being not only female but also male. But even in research, there's a huge focus because apparently how bad the man's situation is, there's hope for the man, but let's fix the woman basically in that sense, which is unfortunately kind of the quintessence of all my research at the moment.
Yeah, and certainly more research that probably still needs to be done. And I think this is also a little bit the chicken and egg problem that we are facing here. On the one side, we are lacking research, we're lacking data. On the other side, this also unfortunately leads to less VC funding or funding in general in this area. So I would love to get a little bit to a solution and see what steps we can actually do to solve this chicken and egg problem. And Jonas, it seems like with your solution, also with the synthetic data, that could be a potential solution. Do you think there's learnings from you and from the company, how you're tackling it, that other healthcare founders can also take on?
To solve the chicken and egg problem between research and funding? Or?
Yes, or in general, how we can take one step already in making sure that healthcare and this underrepresented healthcare solutions are getting more attention and then eventually funding.
I guess the core is, again, commit to the hard problems. So commit to be willing to solve the hard problem, because in the end it's a hard problem, but it's also a problem worth solving. And I think that's the first step, like commit to the hard problems. And then something that's been challenging for us that maybe goes more into like the founding process and not just a cheesy high-level statement is figuring out a balance of reducing market risk and tech risk at the same time. Because what research does, it reduces the technological risk in what you're trying to commercialize. And on the other hand, what you as a founder need to do, you have to reduce product risk, market risk, etc. And for a long time, we tried to tackle it as the typical SaaS companies from Munich, Personio, Celonis, and we were wondering why isn't it working? Just buy stuff that you haven't built before. Just do research your stuff in-house that you have already sold. But that's not working in healthcare. So I feel and it's difficult because there's no clear and very good answer to it. But everyone, as a founder, you always have to figure out what's the balance and what are the structured steps that I can do to balance out reducing the tech risk and the market risk at a similar time and at a similar pace. And I feel that's the way forward, and the first step is commit to a hard problem.
Okay, good to get your founder perspective on that. Maybe the investor's perspective. I know, Jihad, you said you usually don't like to introduce yourself as an investor, but at the end of the day, that's also part of what you do. When you invest in these underrepresented solutions in healthcare, why do you, at the end of the day, then decide to invest in it, and what, from an investor perspective, could be a first step to make sure that these areas are no longer underfunded?
Well, I think one thing which is, for a non-investor perspective, I mean, I was on that other side for a long time. Like most of my career, I was on the other side, and then I switched. And my heart bleeds sometimes to pass on topics where I think that they should be funded. Well, the problem comes from, like, I have basically, a name which is kind of not really philanthropic in that sense, because, I mean, venture capital is by default return oriented and it's financially oriented. So if I start doing philanthropic stuff with this, and I don't mean philanthropic funding underrepresented, it's just like if I just close my one eye on the financial side and just invest, it might work. The history, back history showed that it might not. So I think there's some kind of system problem. I think there should be something different, which is funding those companies where my heart bleeds to say no to it. Is that a fund? I don't know. Is that the government? Maybe. There is an EIC which is funding a lot of the topics. So when I work with the EIC, the European Innovation Fund, or the Council, they fund really cool stuff, and I love that. Like, I would love to fund them, but I know that the mandate I have, I can't. So technically, I need to look at a lot more things. And you started about tech risk, market risk, adoption risk, guideline risk. And we had Anna sitting here, and she was saying, like, she would basically do her entire startup differently. That's what she said, sitting here. I started in healthcare, and it's hard. It's really hard. Like, you need to think about 10,000 things for the future, because that takes 3 years, that takes 3 years, that has a risk, that takes 3 years, and suddenly you look at the horizon of like 9 to 10 years, and you need to really believe that those 10 years, every step, which is binary, it's going to work or not work, it's going to work out. So it's really hard. Would I change and go and do, I don't know, AI or whatever? I wouldn't. But that's something I learned. It's just like, it's tough. Healthcare is tough. As a founder, as an investor as well, and most probably even more as an angel investor, which is, there's even more risk you need to go through.
Definitely. So do we need more public funding then in that area? Do we need more government institutions that are actually putting money into that sector?
I probably have to say yes now, coming from the EIC side. No, but yes, in parts for sure, but I think it also needs to be in a good setup. So looking at the EIC, I mean, there's half of the funding is actually non-dilutive funding, which is really given out in grants, which actually covers especially that phase that we talked about before, right? So clinical trials, basically, I mean, like really the phase before you actually have a product, to be honest, because I mean, like even the first product, right? So, and I think this is like already taking away quite a lot of risk from the VC side. So this is, I think, something that I think, yes, that should be there for a reason. And then when it comes to the fund side, the EIC only invests pari passu, so 50-50, to also make sure that it's still a fundable business, right? Because I think we still come from the perspective, even if the EIC gives money out once, I mean, those companies have to survive, and they have to survive in an environment where they can fundraise, right? So I think this still needs a, business model that is going to work out, that still needs to be, sort of the regulatory perspective, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that can help, right? Again, also, I think in Germany, there's also a new deep tech fund, which basically does the same. So I think there is, and this is not only healthcare, this is like just different categories, so I think that definitely can help. But then I think, again, what we talked before, I think it even starts with basically the data and the research. We need to put more money into that, and that probably has to come from public funding. But again, I think it's not the only solution for sure.
Yeah, probably a very complex topic where we need more solutions.
I mean, just to add on this, I think there's definitely lots of non-dilutive funding for healthcare. It just takes ages to reach that money. I mean, I don't want to start talking about like bureaucracy and all of this stuff, but there's definitely a huge problem of applying for grants, that's already is a mess, then waiting for the argumentation, and then waiting again, and then the money's paid out differently, and then you need to show some milestones. So like there's actually really big money sitting somewhere, but our startups, Jonas, I'm sure you had the same experience, I'm assuming it's not ready to access that money. And then second, when you access it, I think still, even though it's kind of EIC, European tax money, whatever money it is, there needs to be some even more scrutiny, in my opinion. I don't want to criticize anyone investing in like some public money, but I think there are people who need to look at this from a totally different stage, because it doesn't make sense to invest 10 million when you actually have the gut feeling that 10 million is gone. You can see it differently, saying like, oh, it's basically like a Lego, you built the one layer, 10 million is gone, hopefully in 5 years someone will take that layer and put another layer on, and then the Lego goes up. And then hopefully the last bit is basically the product. So I don't think the money is wasted, because if you see it as a Lego thing, every layer is important to reach the aim. But I think if we start a lot more scrutiny, I mean, we invest in 0.3% of the deals we see. That's madness. Like, just imagine how many deals we need to go through to invest in one deal. So I think, I'm not saying that EIC is different, but I'm just saying like, there needs to be really good scrutiny from people who understand the topic, but also have the guts to actually back a team, which is, which is not happening at the moment as much as I think it should.
Definitely agree to that. Jonas, you are in this fortunate position, or actually also, I mean, due to the work that you've put in, that you've raised a round successfully. However, it certainly has not been easy, and as many other founders, you got a lot of no's as well on the way. You agreed up front that you actually will share a little bit about why you also got no's, and what were reasons for investors to not invest in your companies. Maybe there's some learning for other founders overall, and specifically in Healthtech, that can learn from it.
So I guess there are probably always 1,000 reasons why you shouldn't invest in an early stage company, just in general. And there are a few reasons why you should. What we did is we tried to track very carefully why did people say no, and then try to figure out what was the difference to the people that said yes in the end. And what we found in our specific case was challenging, and we found that out kind of like also throughout the process, and we've been able to make some changes to how we pitch the story, how we explain what we're doing. And it was that, and this is specific, I tried to make it a bit more generic in the next step. It was that it was challenging to get people believe into the underlying market that we're building our business on. So we're not doing anything like, hey, we're disrupting the 1.x trillion air freight market or logistics market, but we're saying, hey, we're growing with the medical AI market. We're enabling this market and we're growing with it. Now the question for an investor comes, how can I de-risk what we said before, market risk and adoption risk? Because we're not building on an existing huge market. We're trying to grow with a potentially huge market. Now, I've always been told, if you're fundraising as a founder, you have kind of like two jobs. A, de-risk the key risks of your business, and B, educate investors about it. Now, looking at these macro developments, will medicine, will healthcare adopt AI at a similar pace as it did in the last 5 years? Because the last 5 years were huge. 72% increase or growth annually in radiology AI applications. Will it continue like this? Will the market consolidate? What's the impact of large language models? Like, that's all these variables, you can't control them, and you can't get hard facts to de-risk that. And what I found, if you can't, so to education, I found for myself, or again, two aspects. You can teach, which you can do if you have hard facts that help you de-risk. Best case, you've created evidence yourself. If you don't have hard facts, you can't teach anything. So what you have to do is make people believe. And what do you do if you want to make people believe? You preach. You don't teach, but you preach. And what I thought about was, and that helped me, like flipping that switch helped me a lot, is why do I believe in this? What are the core underlying hypotheses of this market that I believe in? And how can I make investors believe in it? How can I preach these topics? So wrap up for me, key learning was be very aware and be very good in finding out what can you teach, where can you build hard evidence with hard facts, and be very aware of the topics that you just cannot control and you can't build hard evidence, and then figure out how to preach. And finding a good balance, you can't just preach, that won't do the job, but find a good balance between both aspects kind of helped us adjust the story, adjust the pitch, and get very clear about what are the underlying hypotheses, why do we believe in them, and why should you believe in them. And that's, I'd say, our key learning, and that was the key reason why a lot of investors said no in the first place.
I hope all the founders that are now in the audience, joining us in person, also online, made a lot of notes now and take some of the learnings that Jonas just shared with you. One topic that I still want to touch upon, also especially because we are soon running out of time, is business models. Because we just had a panel earlier where they talked about the fall of B2C models, but I think in healthcare, B2C has always been very challenging, and that is also due to the reason that specifically in Europe, the healthcare system is already so great. And at this point, I would actually love the audience to show hands if for everyone that has already spent money on a digital health solution. All right, there's some. Has anyone ever spent more than 100 euros a year on a digital health solution? See, there's less. So for everyone joining us online, there were some hands up when we asked about the first question, but when we asked the later one, so more than 100 euros, I think I saw 2 hands up. So this is already a very strong signal. Kerstin, I know you have a specific opinion about business models in healthcare, and specifically B2B versus B2C.
Yeah, I think first of all, I think we have to be differentiated about that, right? So I think there are definitely, and Giat will probably agree in parts and disagree in other parts, so you can add to that. But I think there are certainly, I mean, we talked about wearables, right? We talked about monitoring devices, etc. There are a lot of probably products that work with a B2C business model, or even more so, and Anna talked about that, potentially even D2C, right? I think what I'm concerned about in a way is that right now, there are a lot of offers like popping up that are actually covered by health insurance, but are not, basically going through the regulatory processes so that they can be refunded. And I'm just concerned about, I think, if we look at Europe and, I think at the healthcare system, we all know that it's basically broken almost everywhere, but at the same time, in Europe, I think it's still not bad enough, right? So I think there's still a lot of things that are basically covered through it, and if you just, inform yourself hard enough and work hard enough on it, etc., then it will be probably covered by the public health insurance and or the private health insurance, but it's just a long way going there. So I think that's number one. And then I think looking at fertility, for example, in specific, I think they're just, and while I'm 100% convinced that, a healthy lifestyle, nutrition, and all of that is very beneficial to basically all these topics, I think there's just also a lot of offerings right now out there, supplements, etc., and you can basically spend a fortune solving something that you don't even know what you're solving, as in like you're maybe not even diagnosed right? So I think we just have to basically combine these two words. We have to basically work on that gap between diagnosis, clinics, and what is out there in the B2C market as well. And I think, again, it's not impossible, but it really depends on where it's coming from and also what the product is, to be honest.
I can add to this thing. For founders and even for fellow investors, I think what I learned in the last 5 years is like there's no one-size-fits-all business model in healthcare. It doesn't work. And going even one deeper, what is healthcare? Can you compare gynecology and radiology? No, you can't, because first, different population, different doctors, different pharma, different funding, different mindsets, almost different education. And it goes for cardiology and neurology. Like basically, each of them is basically a beast itself. And hence, I don't think that there's one size fits all business model in healthcare, because there's just no healthcare. Because we need to see them as in verticals. And everyone who's working in healthcare, pick your battle, which is that's my battle, that's my ecosystem, and figure out what to do. If it's B2C, B2B, people change a lot, and we heard that before as well, saying like, oh, we start B2C and then we move to B2B, but technically we started actually B2C, B2B before, and then we moved to, so there's lots of like coming forward, and that's actually representative of what I'm saying. It's like, you need to find it, and I spent, I think, my life in 7 different healthcare systems until now, and I'm not happy with any of them, or I wasn't happy with any of them, but that's the nature, I think, as well.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I cannot leave this panel without one last statement from all of you. And I would love to hear from all of you, very short and briefly, what's your #1 wish or change you want to see in health tech? Jonas, you want to go first? Can be super short.
Can I go last? I have to think about it, actually.
Sure, Kerstin.
Yeah, what's my #1 wish? So I think, so this is probably more healthcare than health tech, honestly. And by the way, none of us is a trained physician, so I think we're coming from very different perspectives here. Looking at the patient journey again, I think the patient journey just needs to improve. And you talked about that also with like data access already. I mean, it's just hilarious in a way that it's so easy to, access your financial statements online, but you have literally no overview about your health data in a way. And I think, we really need to work on that. And then also the patient journey. I think, patients are being really left alone in some of the most difficult times of their lives, as in like pregnancy loss, fertility, cancer treatment, you name it. So I think we really need to work on those 2 things. And I think in parts health tech can do a lot of work, but I think it's really also much more in healthcare, really.
I think mine would be just for all the founders and the investors, like, do not procrastinate. Like, I wish that people just keep going. That's the only thing I can say. I want to see more founders in healthcare. I want to see more VCs attacking that part of the story. Might sound selfish because I have more deals, but that's not the case. It's just like, just keep going. It's hard, but it's actually worth it.
Nice.
I feel that the first thing we have to do and we have to change as founders, as the system, is tackle the infrastructure, because to build good applications that actually help health, you need a good infrastructure. And it won't work without it. Data, IT per se, digitization per se. And I feel the problem is infrastructure is most of the time always the hardest problem to solve, because it's most deeply integrated into the overall system. But if we solve the infrastructure, I guess the application layer won't solve itself. It's also very restricted on a restricted digital health space now, so it doesn't have to do anything with pharma, biotech, or anything. But solve the infrastructure first. That's hard, but then the applications are way easier.
But as a founder, you love to tackle the hard challenges, right?
It sounds cheesy, but yeah, I try to.
Thank you so much. It was really lovely talking to the 3 of you. And I wish we would have more time, but that's just always the case, right? Thank you so much. Big round of applause, please.